regarding the state and local fiscal recovery funds program. My name is Veronica Soto. I go by Vero, and I am the director of the state and local fiscal recovery funds program. So on this slide, you will see the agenda for today's presentation. We start with a little bit of background on the SLFRF program and recently released reporting data. We focus after that on explaining how local leaders play a critical role in meeting the obligation deadline. I'm sure many of you are thinking of that date. We then finish with a very high-level overview of recent guidance related to updates on obligation. And as a reminder, we have to have all SLFRF funds obligated by December 31st, 2024. It's not going to be the last time you hear that date, but I am sure as good stewards of these funds, you have been thinking about that date often. So you probably have been thinking about December 31st, 2024, because if you haven't heard it from us before, you're going to hear it from me and others. Recipients are required to return to Treasury any funds that are not obligated by that deadline. And so with that high-level setting, I will turn it over to my colleague, Mira. Mira?
Thank you so much, Vero. Hello, everybody. My name is Mira Patel, and I'm the Director of Strategic Partnerships at Treasury and lead the State and Local Fiscal Recovery Funds outreach team. So as you can see, I don't need to tell you that SLFRF, authorized by the American Rescue Plan, is a historic piece of legislation. The $350 billion provided directly to communities to respond to COVID-19 and build strong, resilient, and equitable recovery. It means that states, territories, counties, local governments, and tribes could each address their own needs. $45.6 billion was allocated directly to metropolitan cities and nearly $20 billion to additional smaller local governments. And those funds went directly to your communities for projects that you selected as the best response locally based on eligible uses. Next slide. Before we move on to a discussion on the obligation deadline, I wanted to provide an overview of our April 2024 reporting data, which was just published on our website on Friday. We'll dig into this material a bit more later in this presentation, but the numbers you see on the screen, taken directly from our public data dashboard, provide a summary of what we saw in the latest reporting cycle. Most notably, I wanted to call out recipients' investment in workforce and housing projects. As you can see, recipients have budgeted $19.6 billion SLFRF dollars to over 3,300 housing projects, which is a 3% increase from last quarter's reporting. And on workforce, recipients have budgeted $13.1 billion towards 4,400 workforce projects that have benefited nearly 1.5 million workers across the country. This quarter's impressive data emphasizes the critical investment areas that are being invested in throughout our communities. I encourage you to take a look at this data yourself on our website under the public data webpage. To share more, I'll turn it over to my colleague, James Bond.
Thank you, Mira. I'd like to turn to some more in-depth top-line data from our recently released public data from the 2024 to Q1 reporting cycle that does demonstrate how recipients have been putting the power of their SLFRF program dollars to such great effect to create positive change in their communities. From supporting economic recovery, job creation, and workforce expansion to increasing access to healthy, safe, and affordable housing, the impact that has been so clearly made on their communities and the nation is nothing short of remarkable. In this latest quarterly data that's submitted to the Treasury Department through March 31st, 2024, recipients continue to report great progress in executing on their planned uses of SLFRF award funds. And states and the largest cities and counties have reported budgeting 94% of their total SLFRF funds to specific projects, with the total number of reported projects growing 20% since the previous reporting period. And that just demonstrates continued steady progress in recipients planning for the use of these funds. More specifically, SLFRF recipients reported $317 billion in lost revenue resulting from the pandemic, and a significant proportion of this revenue shortfall is being made up for with SLFRF funds. More than 20,000 participating governments reported that they are budgeting nearly $130 billion in SLFRF funds to help replace this lost revenue. And they're funding more than 78,000 projects to provide fiscal stability in their jurisdictions. The data illustrate that the American Rescue Plan prevented severe cuts to public services and helped state, territorial, tribal, and local governments resume normal operations. In addition to responding to the immediate aftermath of the pandemic, governments are investing SLFRF funds to address long-standing structural challenges in the economy that the pandemic surfaced and exacerbated, especially the need to increase the availability of affordable housing and invest in their workforces. I'm going to now turn to discussing what constitutes an obligation. If we could go to the, this slide. There's a QR code in the lower right hand of this slide, which links to our online SLFRF FAQs and will allow you to follow along as we reference them during this presentation. For all 7 eligible uses, including the provision of government services for funds claimed under revenue loss, recipients must obligate SLFRF funds by December 31st, 2024. Recipients must expend SLFRF funds for all eligible uses except surface transportation projects and Title I projects by December 31st, 2026. Now for those recipients that are expending SLFRF funds for obligated for surface transportation projects and Title I projects, they need to do so by September 30th, 2026. So what is an obligation? An obligation continues to mean an order placed for property and services and entry into contracts, subawards, and similar transactions that require payment. This definition has not changed since the program launched in 2021. Some of these items have always constituted an obligation, such as a contract or subaward. Some of these items have recently been clarified as counting as an obligation in the obligation IFR and the new frequently asked questions. There are several pathways via which an obligation can be incurred. They are an order placed for property or services, a contract, a subaward, similar transactions that require payment, which may include interagency agreements if they meet the conditions in FAQ 17.6, payroll expenses for recipient employees if they meet the conditions in FAQ 17.7, and cost related to certain legal and administrative requirements of the SLFRF award funds. Treasury has released the new Section 17 of the FAQs to provide additional clarifications on the definition of obligation to help recipients ensure effective and efficient implementation of recipient funds. And that includes how to cover payroll cost in 2025 or in FY25 and FY26, how interagency agreements between departments count as an obligation, and flexibility to cover contract cost increases. Now I want to talk about what does not constitute an obligation. So an obligation is not an adopted budget or budget amendment, an appropriation of SLFRF funds, an executive order, a resolution, a written or oral intention to enter into a contract, a grant of legal authority to enter into a contract, claiming funds under the revenue loss category, and this includes utilizing the $10 million standard allowance. So I want to note that any recipient using the revenue loss eligible use category must still meet the obligation deadline and enter expenditure information as a project in their project and expenditure report. And then the moving SLFRF funds to a general fund as revenue loss, but not further establishing an obligation with those funds by December 31st, 2024 also does not constitute an obligation. So I want to run through a couple obligation to-dos. Well in advance of the December 2024 deadline, ensure your projects will be obligated by this deadline. Some ideas for this assurance include getting your staff to give you a written plan for how they are ensuring your projects are satisfying the definition of obligation, asking for a formal briefing at a committee or to the whole council or government body, or having a staff develop a calendar of key dates that might still require a government body action to share with you and your other members of your government body. Another set of obligation to-dos include develop contingency or backup plans for projects that may not be obligated by December. Funds not obligated by December 31st, 2024 will need to be returned to Treasury. Prepare for the council actions to return the funds to Treasury if that's the case. I now want to hand it over to my colleague Joel to share some more information on some new hot off the presses resources. Joel?
Thanks, James. Before I get into the discussion on this slide, I want to encourage you to scan the QR code on the bottom right corner of the screen, where you'll find a one-page document with more information about the interagency agreements that we'll be discussing. So in FAQ 17.6, Treasury clarified that interagency agreements that meet certain conditions qualify as transactions requiring payment and are thus sufficient to meet the obligation requirement of SLFRF. If you finalize an interagency agreement by the obligation deadline at the end of 2024, you can treat that interagency agreement as the obligation of funds that a government agency will then expend in 2025 and 2026. And as the slide notes, memoranda of agreement and memoranda of understanding can count as interagency agreements. Any agreement must meet the requirements that are summarized on this slide and that are further detailed in FAQ 17.6. I encourage you to take a look at that FAQ and the one-pager that are that's available at the scanned QR code. Next slide, please. So in addition to responding to the immediate aftermath of the pandemic, governments are investing SLFRF funds to address longstanding economic challenges, including, as my colleagues alluded to earlier, and especially the need to increase the availability of affordable housing and invest in their workforces. Investing in and expanding access to affordable housing is a key goal of the Treasury Department and of the Biden-Harris administration. Governments across the country are leveraging SLFRF award funds to construct new housing and to rehabilitate or repair existing housing. In the summer of 2022, Treasury expanded the flexibility for recipients to use their SLFRF funds to invest in making affordable housing. Since then, spending on affordable housing continues to accelerate. Treasury, in partnership with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development and the U.S. Department of Agriculture, recently updated our Affordable Housing How-To Guide this June, and we've made this guide available online. If you scan the QR code on this screen, you'll see the Affordable Housing How-To Guide. This guide spells out our new guidance that substantially expands the universe of affordable housing projects presumptively eligible to be funded through SLFRF by providing a summary of updated guidance related to SLFRF's recipients' ability to use those funds to invest in affordable housing. The guidance clarifies and expands on the framework that is outlined in the SLFRF final rule updates in March 2024 with FAQs 2.14 and 4.9. This Affordable Housing How-To Guide provides examples showing how recipients can combine and layer SLFRF with other sources of funding to maximize resources and meet housing needs in your communities. I'd like to take a moment to pause here to encourage you, if you've not already done so, to use your smart device to scan that QR code you see displayed on the screen. And as I said, that will link to the Affordable Housing How-To Guide that we've been discussing. I hope that's useful. I'll now turn it back over to my colleague, Mira.
Thank you so much, Joel. And thank you all for joining us here today. I want to give a special note of gratitude to NACo and to Results for America for their partnership on this important presentation. These opportunities are possible because the economy is in a stronger place today as a result of the American Rescue Plan. And looking forward, the Treasury Department remains focused on ensuring that recipients can leverage their SLFRF award funds to meet the unique needs of their communities in ways that will power inclusive and equitable economic growth for decades to come. As public servants in the United States, we recognize that there are real lives behind the data displayed on these screens. Our work extends beyond tracking trends. It has a direct impact on the nation's well-being, the economy, and our quality of life. It touches our families, our neighbors, our communities, and shapes our future. So I encourage you to please continue to share your stories of how your communities, those real people perspectives, have benefited from these funds. And we look forward to being in touch. With that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Erin at NACo. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Mira, and all of our partners at the Treasury Department for hosting this webinar. We truly appreciate the partnership over the years since ARPA was signed into law back in March of 2022. We are now excited to hear from our next speaker, who is a close friend and colleague of NACo, and that is County Executive David Crowley with Milwaukee County, Wisconsin. Milwaukee County, under County Executive Crowley's leadership, has done an incredible job since funding was authorized under ARPA to the county in terms of investments, supporting communities and residents on the ground. So with that, County Executive, thank you so much for joining us today, and I will turn it over to you. Thank you again.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Erin, and good afternoon to everyone who is here. First and foremost, I do want to say thank you to NACo, thank you to the U.S. Department of Treasury and Results for America for this opportunity to really discuss how Milwaukee County invested our ARPA funds. And so I sincerely appreciate the partnership of these organizations and their continued effort to put forth opportunities that enable communities to share best practices. Now, for those who may not know, in 2019, in Milwaukee County, we became one of the first jurisdictions in the nation to declare racism as a public health crisis. And when I entered office, our Milwaukee County Board of Supervisors and myself, we immediately passed an ordinance to advance racial equity and eliminate health disparities. And so when Milwaukee County received our $183 million in ARPA funds, we use these one-time federal recovery dollars to advance our vision of racial equity and health equity. And so instead of pouring those resources to fund ongoing services and creating even larger budget gaps down the road, we found smart ways to really support the community as we transition from a state of emergency to a state of recovery. And so one of the first things that we did is we created the ARPA Task Force, which facilitated a process to help us evaluate projects and recommend funding for items that were aligned with our vision. And so the ARPA Task Force, this is a cross-section of Milwaukee County leaders that provides funding recommendations to our Milwaukee County Board. Now, overall, we funded 73 projects, with the most of these funds going towards projects that improve the county's fiscal health and our response to the economic harms as it relates to our workers, the families, the small businesses, impacted industries, as well as the public sector. And so we invested in programs that were really designed to not only stabilize, but to help improve the pre-pandemic conditions for most of our impacted communities. So we used our dollars to build the capacity of many community organizations that serve people with significant barriers to services. And so under my direction, our Department of Health and Human Services, their housing division, we were funded the largest number of affordable housing projects in our county's entire history. And so my administration, we've provided $19 million in funding, particularly for affordable housing all across Milwaukee County. And so thanks to the ARPA funding, in 2023, we broke ground. We broke ground on our future Marshall P. Cox Health and Human Service Center. And so for the first time in Milwaukee County's history, our Department of Health and Human Services will have a building designed specifically to delivering health and human services. And this helps us by eliminating physical barriers to receive care. This is helping to improve access to the resources and services that many families and individuals rely on. But these funds also brought an unprecedented injection of capital into our local economy. And so these investments, they provide an opportunity, particularly for disadvantaged businesses, both minority and women-owned, to work closely with us at Milwaukee County and not only grow their business, but also the communities that we support. But this administration, my administration, we've also created the framework for the Milwaukee County Climate Action Plan to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2050, while also making sure that we're advancing equity, justice, and resilience all throughout our community. And so this framework, it has really helped to inform particularly our Lighting Jobs program, which was also funded through the American Rescue Plan Act. And so through this program, the county, we've created a career pathways, particularly for young people, by training them to install energy efficient enhancements in Milwaukee County buildings. And so I inherited a structural deficit when I first took office, which was only exacerbated, as many of you would understand, by the COVID-19 pandemic. And so addressing this particular deficit by using ARPA funds to support innovative strategies was a clear priority for this administration. And so we created the Fiscal Health Challenge. Now, this was a challenge that really allowed Milwaukee County, our departments, to propose strategies that decrease county spending, increase revenue, or create some operational efficiency. And so this challenge was very competitive, and ultimately it helped us fund a total of about 15 different projects. And so while the Fiscal Health Challenge encouraged, ideas created by our Milwaukee County departments, I can assure you that these projects were developed with and by the community were also approved. And so we made sure that community participation particularly was a part of this process every step of the way. It's not only important to us as a county, but it's definitely important to our community members. And so to do this, we recruited community partners. We recruited residents to participate on the community support service area subgroups. And so overall, we had about 3 different subgroups with community participation, and they recommended a total of 22 projects. And our residents, they were really encouraged to really share their priorities about how we should be spending our ARPA funds. And we received a total of 137 ideas from community members. But I'm proud to say, and I'm proud to share, that 85% of the community support programs and projects that were given to us aligned with the top 5 community priorities of Milwaukee County. And so we've always supported participatory budgeting, particularly through our ARPA funds as well. But this also allowed community members to make direct decisions about how to allocate a portion of our ARPA budgets. And as a result, we were funding about $800,000 for early childhood and family support participatory budgeting. But in addition to that, we funded $600,000 for zero youth corrections. And this decision, it came from 6 community listening sessions attended by 189 community members, 37 of whom have had a personal history or have touched the criminal justice system in some type of shape, form, or capacity. And so I'm extremely proud to support participatory budgeting through my annual budgeting process, but we also rely on the support of our Office of Equity to do the same. And so during my time at Milwaukee County, we also created the Office of Equity, and this has helped to advance equity-based policies throughout Milwaukee County. And so the Office of Equity, they've received about $2 million, over $2 million, to develop a community engagement strategy. And this is really centers around our community health, but also the resilience, and to help build community and leadership, organizational leadership, as well as advocating to increase the capacity of Milwaukee County residents. And so under my leadership, but also under my administration, this Office of Equity have compiled an online racial equity toolkit that really reflects all countywide equity efforts. But it's also led to a case study on community resilience during the COVID-19 pandemic. And so next thing that we did is we've made sure that every decision that we make within Milwaukee County is transparent. And so we've created an ARPA website, particularly for people who is interested in learning how we funded our community projects, but what we funded. And so they can always visit that website. And so this particular website, it hosts two different types of dashboards that provides more information on the 22 projects that were funded through our community support category, and another focus on the 45 projects that was funded through the revenue loss recovery. And as you can tell, I'm very proud. I'm very proud of what we've accomplished through our ARPA funding. And we want to make sure that all of our ARPA projects, they're complete, they have complete performance evaluations. And so we want to know, did we meet what we intended? Did we meet the intended outcomes? Did we advance our strategic objectives through the use of these ARPA funds, particularly towards addressing the two main things that we care about, which is the disparities, but also making sure we're putting our money where our mouth is by advancing equity. And so for that reason, we funded an evaluation project to really help us understand to the extent of which these projects achieve their goals, as well as how those achievements ladder up to the county's strategic objectives. And so when we evaluated our ARPA projects, we'll be able to understand and communicate the return on investment, but also the progress towards our goals and intended outcomes, as well as the impact of ARPA investments on our residents, on our communities, and on the county's fiscal health. Now, I didn't do this work alone. You know, we like to work together. And so I'm extremely proud, particularly of our American Rescue Plan Act Task Force and our Milwaukee County Board of Supervisors for their work to really approve these funds. We were able to get these dollars out of the door very quickly. And so my staff works to make sure that these funds are not only spent, but the programs are delivered with an eye towards innovation. And so with that, I do want to say thank you again for your time. Thank you to NACo for their continued and unrelenting support of counties across this entire nation. You've definitely been a huge resource and an effective advocate for Milwaukee County. And I also want to say thank you to the Treasury for this opportunity to share best practices and enable local governments to better serve our communities. And last but certainly not least, thank you to Results for America, which shares Milwaukee County's belief of utilizing effective data-driven best practices to really implement resources and put these dollars right back into our community. And so if folks have questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to not only me, my team, or anyone connected to Milwaukee County for more additional information. And with that, I'll pass it back over to you, Erin.
Thank you so much, County Executive. That was an absolutely incredible overview of the great work that Milwaukee County is doing, everything from the community engagement piece, all of the investments you made, and then of course, emphasizing all of the data-driven practices that we know that are extremely important to really get a better sense of how impactful all of the programs you've implemented to support your communities and residents. So thank you again so much, County Executive, for joining us.
Thank you.
So we will now go ahead and turn to the NACo portion of this presentation. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining Treasury, NACo, and Results for America on this first kind of kickoff series of various educational sessions that we'll have moving forward. My name is Erin Hurley. I serve as the Director of Government Affairs here at the National Association of Counties, and have been working on the implementation of the ARPA State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund since 2021, and have just had a great relationship with our partners at Treasury throughout the years. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and kind of just have a couple tiered approach in terms of what I'm going to be talking about here today. First, I want to demonstrate the work that we've done with Treasury since the American Rescue Plan Act was signed into law. I want to emphasize a couple of pieces that our friends at Treasury just reviewed specifically around obligation and how you can make the most of investments leading up to the 2024 obligation deadline. And then also some new resources that Treasury has released and how NACo and Treasury are engaging moving forward. So as you can see here, why the relationship is so beneficial between NACo and Treasury is that from the onset, since ARPA was signed into law, NACo has met consistently with the Department of Treasury around eligible uses, reporting requirements, and new flexibilities. As soon as the bill was signed into law, or the package was signed into law, NACo had multiple meetings with the Department of Treasury so that we could all be on the same page in terms of what are the vast county roles and responsibilities that we have when supporting our residents, to make sure that there was a holistic idea in terms of what sort of eligible uses could be included into those kind of larger eligible use buckets around public health, negative economic impacts, public sector workforce, water, sewer, and broadband. And then, of course, revenue loss as well, too. So making sure that we were able to really identify all of your functions and mandated responsibilities as well too, when we're thinking about kind of in the weeds around eligible uses. So Treasury heard us when they released that final rule in January of 2022. And we did have follow-up meetings with Treasury as well too for additional clarifications around eligible uses so that we could make sure that counties are investing funds and making sure that they are complying with guidance. I will say, beyond that January 2022 date, NACo has consistently met with Treasury around new guidance that has been released in accordance with different legislation was passed, whether it was like that Cornyn-Padilla amendment that expanded the scope of eligible uses to community development block grant, CDBG projects, surface transportation projects, as well as disaster relief efforts as well too. So making sure that we're coordinating around those eligible uses, and again, providing feedback of what we're hearing from county leaders across the country. I will say also to this day, we do have weekly standing meetings between NACo and the Treasury Department, and we are pretty much brainstorming how we can best work together to provide resources to county leaders, whether again it's around guidance, reporting requirements, as those are continuing to be updated around the obligation interim final rule that came out. Again, the Cornyn-Padilla legislation that we saw being passed back in December of 2023. So we continue to have those meetings. The reason why I want to say that is that you'll have my contact information at the end of this presentation. If you have any sort of feedback or questions for the Department of Treasury, if you aren't in communication with them already, more than happy to hear from you and work with Treasury around those items, as we do have these weekly meetings, so we are all on the same page. Now, I wanted to get into that obligation interim final rule and FAQs that we heard from Treasury a little bit about just right before this, but wanted to kind of really hit home the point for county leaders about the new flexibilities that they have in these obligation FAQs and interim final rule, as you're thinking about, okay, how do I best obligate these funds ahead of the December 2024 deadline? You likely have seen that NACo has released a lot of information around the obligation interim final rule and corresponding FAQs. We did have a webinar a couple months ago when the FAQs were released, and we do have an updated analysis on our website as well. Again, want to do a huge shout out and thank you to our partners at Treasury, because they did hear the feedback that county leaders and NACo did have regarding the definition of obligation and around what is the most efficient and effective definition and ways in which counties are able to invest those funds. So just some of the major wins and highlights for counties around this new obligation guidance is that counties can use your ARPA state and local fiscal recovery funds for personnel costs for any sort of eligible position under Treasury's guidance. So really kind of think about the public health and public safety employees that you're able to those are the eligible positions under Treasury's guidance. If you have those positions filed by the obligation deadline of December 31st, 2024, you will actually be able to cover those personnel costs until December 31st of 2026. We know that many positions are already being covered by the ARPA state and local fiscal recovery funds. So this was a huge flexibility that was granted under the more recently released FAQs that came out. So again, really major win for counties and work with Treasury that we were able to accomplish. Ultimately, if you do decide to use your ARPA state and local fiscal recovery funds for those personnel costs, you do have to report out an estimate for how much you anticipate those those personnel costs to be. So you would be reporting that in your project and expenditure reports or your P&E reports. There is a little bit difference in terms of dates here for those quarterly ARPA report filers. So think of the larger urban counties that have a population of 250,000 and above, or received more than $10 million in ARPA funds. You are going to have to report by January 31st of 2025. And then for those smaller counties that didn't receive $10 million and have a population less of 250,000 residents, you have a little bit more time until April 30th of 2025. Two other key highlights is that subrecipients are not subject to that December 31st, 2024 obligation deadline. So just making sure that all of the funds are spent by December of 2026. So you have your subrecipient agreements in place. Of course, just make sure definitely that all of the funds are expended by 2026. And then the final key highlight here is that after the December 31st, 2024 obligation deadlines, counties do have the option to reclassify excess funds from one eligible project to another, which I'll talk about in just a minute. So kind of going into a little bit more detail on that personnel cost piece. As I mentioned, as long as you have positions filed by the December 2024 obligation deadline, you can cover those personnel costs until December 31st of 2026. So what do personnel costs actually include? It's salary and wages, covered benefits, and payroll taxes. Some other key pieces around covering these personnel costs. So again, I've mentioned this a couple times. As long as the positions that you are obligating funds for are reported by December 2024, that obligation deadline, you can actually reorganize positions to continue to cover those personnel costs. Simply, you can't add any new positions after December 31st of 2024. So let's just say you have like 10 positions that you reported to Treasury, you were provided those estimates as well too. You're not able to, add any sort of position. You couldn't cover 11, for example. There are a couple of examples that you will see on the right side of the screen, just to kind of help county leaders as they're thinking about, okay, what can we do or what are we prohibited in doing? So an example here is if there's turnover in personnel, a county may continue to pay different personnel in that same job position. So again, going back to that 10, if you are covering costs for 10 personnel or 10 employees, if someone is laid off, you have 9. As long as you are sticking to that 10 number and that person has that same job position, you can cover that additional person's personnel costs. As I mentioned, you can reorganize those positions as well too, as long as it's an eligible position or an eligible use. And then the final example here is, again, going back to that 10 employee example. If you have 10 job training specialists that are again reported by December 2024, you may use the funds to cover payroll for one of those training specialists who might have been promoted. So again, you have flexibility in there. The other key piece that I wanted to highlight is the reclassifying of funds for other eligible uses. So after the December 31st, 2024 obligation deadline, if your county has excess funds that were not obligated by the deadline, or that were obligated by the deadline, but not expended on an actual activity, you can actually reclassify your state and local fiscal recovery funds from the original activity to another eligible state and local fiscal recovery fund program, so long as your county actually incurred an obligation for that project that you're trying to reclassify funds towards by December 31st of 2024. So again, you have a couple of examples on the right side of the screen. I think one that I'll just highlight before I move on to kind of future Treasury and NACo collaboration efforts is that, say your county decided to use your funds for a project, you obligated funds before December 2024, you thought that it complied with the guidance. However, a couple months after the obligation deadline, say maybe your county auditor says, okay, actually this negative economic impact program that you decided to obligate funds towards, it's actually really not in compliance with Treasury's guidance, maybe because, as you all know, the activities that you are doing, however you're allocating funds, it has to be proportional to the impact that a resident, a household, a community experience. So maybe, your auditor is thinking, okay, well, this wasn't proportional. The funding is too high for the impact experienced by residents, household, community. They deem it that it is no longer eligible. So now, under this new obligation guidance, what you're actually able to do is reclassify those funds that you had originally obligated towards this program, this negative economic impact program, and reclassify it to another eligible use or another eligible program under Treasury's guidance. Really, what you just have to do is demonstrate that you had a contract in place for, the other program by December 31st of 2024. So that's really, really key there. But again, this reclassifying ability really allows counties to make sure that they are making the most out of these ARPA dollars with the limited amount of time left and being able to provide the services and support that our residents need. So those are the two major items that I wanted to point out, just so county leaders are really thinking about the best ways to invest the funds with the new flexibilities, given that we are in this tight timeline with the obligation date coming up. Other two quick items that I did want to mention is Treasury did release an interagency agreement quick reference guide that they mentioned earlier, but again, really want to reiterate and hit that point home to folks. What this does is that it provides an overview of certain requirements and a checklist for county interagency agreements. What NACo will do on our end, and we'll be sure about it, we typically always write blogs about new resources that Treasury has come out with, whether it be this quick reference guide, other helpful tools, especially when it comes to completing your project and expenditure reports. So NACo will definitely work with Treasury to make sure that all county leaders are aware of this new resource and have access to it. You actually can, if you scan the QR code on the screen right now, it will actually take you directly to Treasury's quick reference guide right now. So you actually have that ready to go. And another point that I already mentioned at the top of my presentation is the educational series. But again, just to reiterate, this is the beginning of a series of educational sessions that we're going to be doing with the Department of Treasury. They are mostly going to be focused on obligation, making sure that you all are aware of how to, most effectively and efficiently obligate your funds ahead of the deadline. But we will do kind of a spotlight on various areas, whether it's around housing, workforce development, and so on. Another, kind of plug there is if you do have ideas for, other sessions that you think would be helpful over the next few months, definitely feel free to reach out to myself, to Treasury, and it would be very, very helpful on that point too. And then finally, last point here, NACo does have an ARPA resource hub. So again, if you scan that QR code, it'll take you to that resource hub. We feature new Treasury guidance, ARPA investment spotlights, other reports from think tanks and partners like Results for America as well too, that will give you a good idea in terms of, okay, how can we continue investing these funds? Another resource that we have for you all is that you'll see on the bottom left hand of the screen, we do have an email address for questions from county leaders. So if you have a question about the ARPA State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund, just go ahead and email questions@naco.org, and that will go to NACo staff and we'll be able to answer your questions there. And finally, just my contact information right here. That is my email and phone number. So please feel free to reach out with any questions, whether about this presentation or ARPA more generally as well too. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Zach Markovitz. He serves as the Vice President and Local Practice Lead at Results for America. Zach and Results for America has been an incredible partner with NACo, and we're so appreciative of all of your work and looking forward to your presentation. So Zach, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Erin. I appreciate those comments, that presentation, and the warm introduction. And thank you all. I'm going to share my screen. Thank you to U.S. Treasury, the whole NACo team, Erin, and your whole team there, County Exec Crowley, and every one of you for joining today. I'm honored to be here representing Results for America and to discuss with you some of what we've done to support jurisdictions across the country to use data and evidence in spending the state and local fiscal relief funds, and to help them and you all spend towards what works. So today I want to talk with you a bit about tools you can use. I'm going to start a bit about RFA, who we are, what we do. I'll go a little bit into background, much of which many of you already know, about state and local fiscal relief funds, and some 5 data and evidence practices that we have seen kind of nested in the guidance. I'll go into a few tools and resources for spending towards evidence-based practices using state and local fiscal relief funds. And finally, some suggestions that may have come, that really come from many of you and your colleagues from across the country who are looking to obligate funds before the end of this year. And I just understanding all the caveats on the obligations that you heard from the team at U.S. Treasury and that Erin just laid out a bit at the beginning of this webinar. First, a bit about Results for America. So Results for America is a nonprofit organization with a mission of making what works the new normal for government. With government really as the center of work, with the goal of taking the $2 trillion, over $2 trillion that governments spend every year to accelerate economic mobility and close racial gaps across the country. And as you are aware, I don't need to tell this group, the American Rescue Plan not only had provided almost $2 trillion in federal stimulus funds, but $350 billion going directly to many of you, state and local and tribal governments through the SLRF funds. This is the largest ever investment that we've seen of federal dollars to build state and local government capacity to use data and evidence to deliver on the equitable outcomes and towards economic mobility that we'd ever seen. And to make the most of this opportunity, one of the things that we were really excited to see in the guidance that Treasury had put out was sort of, we had boiled down into 5 key practices that were there to incentivize state, local, and tribal governments to invest the dollars, not just in recovery, but to advance economic recovery, economic mobility, and racial equity using an evidence-based approach. You can see these 5 areas on these slides that includes, building data and evidence capacity, use of data and evidence, investing in evaluation, engaging communities, and ensuring, as I mentioned, equitable outcomes. We know that using these dollars in the most cost-effective way is a priority for most jurisdictions, and why many of you are on this call today. Prioritizing evidence-based policies and programs is the surest way to achieve those outcomes. And as we think about obligating the remaining funds, RFA has been working with so many of you across the country to think about how to prioritize evidence-based programs and evaluations in this spending. So what I think our role here on this call is today is to share a few tools you can use to immediately support this in your jurisdiction. So let me run through a few just for you now. The first is the Results for America, the American Rescue Plan Data and Evidence Dashboard. This is something Results for America and Mathematica released that looks at how state and local government leaders have been investing their American Rescue Plan funds, the state and local fiscal relief funds, and how they're using data and evidence to get better results. The dashboard is based on analysis of 200 of the recovery plan performance reports. Many of you have submitted to Treasury from 50 states, 83 counties, and 67 cities across the country. It's a snapshot, but a really comprehensive snapshot of funding priorities and how well state and local policymakers are implementing these 5 Treasury data and evidence practices I just highlighted that can really serve as a criteria for how governments should invest our dollars to maximize the impact of their investments. I mentioned how many jurisdictions it's from. It includes analysis of over 8,300 projects from these 200 reports. That includes we pull out 110 notable projects that I think you all can use and serve as models for investment. And this includes 24 evidence-based solutions that totals over $300 million that can serve as models for you all. 44 examples building evaluations in investments, and another 44 examples that is almost $600 million investment of state and local governments developing in-house data and evidence capacity. The most effective use of this tool, for those of you looking to obligate new funding now, is to piece through the notable projects and examples. But I want to call out a couple of interesting information that has come from this dashboard, but you may not be able to pull out directly from just poking around in it. The first is confirmation that I think many of you probably feel that investment in core data practices is critical to preparedness and use of these funds. In a separate analysis that we did with Mathematica of the data in this dashboard, as well as with data from our What Works Cities certification program. This is a program that measures how cities specifically use data in managing city processes, and it looks at how this is done in a best of class process. We have found that certified cities, those that are sort of not the top of using data to drive city processes, were better positioned to use data and evidence to promote recovery, economic mobility, and racial equity through ARPFs. The second piece of information I want to call out here is that we had found that in a descriptive way that about 40% of jurisdictions we tracked were investing American Rescue Plan funds in pilot programs, but many, many fewer were investing in evaluating these programs. And this is something you can use these funds for. I would encourage you to think about, and I'll get to a resource for that in a second. Okay, before getting to the next tool, just want to highlight a couple of examples of the kinds of notable projects that you can find in this dashboard. And these are obviously on top of the great example that Mr. Crowley did and discussed earlier in the call today. First is Bernalillo County in New Mexico. This Care Campus Service Programs. This is a evidence-based community, uses evidence-based community reinforcement approach towards behavioral and health assistance to young adults. A really good example of how sort of using the data and the evidence that exists in the field towards a really key priority for the county itself. In Lexington, Fayette County in Kentucky, you see NAMI supported here. This is a mental health court that uses an evidence-based approach at supporting problem solving for those who are suffering from mental illness and from the criminal justice system at large. This is a nonprofit that the county is funded there, but wanted to highlight this again as another kind of evidence-based program that our funds could ultimately support. So tool number 2 here is Results from America's Economic Mobility Catalog. The Economic Mobility Catalog is a clearinghouse, a catalog of strategies and models that are evidence-based, and it's designed specifically for local leaders like yourself to facilitate identifying and implementing evidence-based strategy. It allows you to bring evidence-based programs into your community, in particular programs that have been leveraged by others and other communities out there. Something any jurisdiction can use and can use really any of your funds available, including recovery funds. So something you may want to bookmark for budgeting processes. And you can see through this call out here how it's structured. You can look by economic mobility strategy, so early childhood, K through 12, et cetera, or by specifically the population outcome that you're looking maybe to drive from a priority in your community. So kindergarten readiness, post-secondary enrollment, et cetera. Below these pages, you'll feel it organized by strategies and programs or tactics beneath that, with many different case studies. This is designed not for just interested passive observers or academics. It's focused and been structured around government officials who are looking to replicate and scale solutions into your backyard. And specifically for you all today, and for the purposes of American Rescue Plan, we want this to be especially useful for decision makers. And so we have a badge on specific pages that we see are eligible for SLFRF dollars. Here you'll see the page on the home instruction for parents and preschool youngsters, which is an evidence-based strategy. And it has that kind of ARPA eligible badge directly on its main page. You see the orange arrow pointing to it right there. This is a great way to source new programs for your community, especially those that have been shown to work elsewhere and that may be tied to critical priorities you are facing in your backyard. Lastly, and most recently, is our newly released evidence policy guide. As I mentioned before, through some of our research with NACo, we found 40% of jurisdictions we tracked are investing in investing ARPA funds on pilot programs, but fewer are investing in evaluating those programs. On top of that, and again, through speaking with many of you on this call today, we know that government leaders are increasingly looking for opportunities to better support residents through policies that deliver results. And to assist in this effort, we had built this evaluation policy guide. It's a new resource, and you'll find the best elements and key lessons that we've learned at the federal, state, and local government policies that encourage and shape the use of evidence to improve the impact of government spending. I've pulled out this table of contents that you can see here because it starts with sections on defining evidence, evidence of effectiveness and equity, goes into incorporation of community into the process through creation of evaluation policy and into how to make evidence-based funding decisions, and then how to sustain it through a culture of evidence and evaluation. On top of this, each chapter has specific worksheets that you can use with your teams to execute this flawlessly, as well as a chapter at the end that pulls those worksheets together. But in case you run into issues, I'll have our contact information at the end of these slides so that we can provide some help. So finally, I want to provide some initial ideas on obligating the remaining state and local fiscal relief funds towards these programs. And these are some ideas, but I would encourage you to make sure you're following what Aaron presented and the Treasury team presented earlier. So the first is look at assessing your current programs, identifying any that may already have an evidence base and could be modified to incorporate key design principles. You may have lots of programs that are evidence-based that you could look at expanding the contract or the opportunity to deliver on the supports you have there. On that, consider expanding or scaling the evidence-based programs that you have. This might be through individual program itself or building out the key design principles that made that program evidence-based into existing RFPs. May want to think about investing in evaluating a current program that does not already have an evidence base. So this goes back to the evaluation policy guide. How can you sort of think about further studying this? There's a lot of research out there of what evidence of impact, but maybe not evidence of how it's implemented effectively. And so building evaluation to it is really important. Explore maybe one-time evidence-based investments. This could be training school staff on positive behavioral supports, or even one-time purchases like NACo for supporting critical outcomes in your backyard. And finally, identify any planned spending, like database or IT upgrades that could increase the data evidence capacity. These are key points. We've seen a lot of jurisdictions be successful on this across the board. With that, I will thank you for your time. I want to provide our information here should you have immediate question on these tools, and I or our team here are able to connect you to the right people to get the information you need. Thank you again to Treasury, to NACo, to County Exec Crowley. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to the team at US Treasury.
Great. Thank you so much, Zach. Really appreciate it. And thank you all for joining us here today, for all of our speakers, for their insightful perspectives. We look forward to having you join us at future educational sessions to provide resources and guidance on how to meet the obligation deadline for the SLFRF funds of December 31st, 2024. And if you have any questions in the meantime, you can contact us at slfrf@treasury.gov. With that, we will conclude this session. Have a great day. Thank you.